Call to order for a Watertown City Council work session for February 10th of 2025. Interim City Manager Bob Zine, would you please call the roll?
Okay. Bueller is on his way. Danforth?
Here.
Helene?
Here.
Jurens? Absent. Peters?
Here.
Shetty?
Here.
Tupper?
Here.
Thank you.
Quorum is established. Chair will entertain a motion to approve today's agenda. Motion made by Councilman Tupper, seconded by Councilman Peters. Any comments on that? Hearing none, the motion is to approve the agenda. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. We have 2 items on our regular agenda, and we are going to start with the development agreement discussion. We'll go to our city engineer, Justin Peterson.
Thank you, Mayor. Here to talk about the development agreements, but before we do, I thought this would be a good time to introduce the engineering staff. I was reminded a couple weeks ago that hadn't informed the council that we are fully staffed for the first time in 5 years. So behind me, Marcy Luno, she's been here since 2019. She's been involved in a lot of different stuff, developments, project management for the wastewater project, budgeting, all kinds of stuff. So Craig over there in the end, he's been here since 2022. After 12 years at the DOT, he brings surveying, drafting, and construction management experience. Caitlin also comes to us in between Marcy and Craig, comes to us from the DOT, so also has drafting, surveying, and construction management experience. She also helps with the MS4 and shoreline stabilization and some of the other duties that Roger had when he was here with the Upper Big Sioux. Chaz, right there, he started as an intern last April, came full-time in August, and then got his master's degree in December. He's got a diverse background in construction, military, teaching, and welding. And then Lucas, he came to us and started here in October. He's our most recent hire. He's a graduate at SDSU and has over 12 years of engineering management experience, and he's been a great addition to the team. So these folks here, I cannot say enough about the team we have. So just like to thank them and introduce them to the council. The focus of this presentation is on the developments and the status of developments. Give a preview of some possible ordinance changes and explain some of the reasoning, and then get some feedback from council is kind of the goal. Start off with a summary of the development process. The developers start with a concept plan and preliminary plan, which is kind of led by the community development side, and then the construction plans for each phase, and that's when kind of engineering gets involved. Well, we're involved in all the things, but construction plans are the ones where we kind of take the lead. Developers may also annex and rezone before platting. At the time of platting, the development agreement is signed by the developer and the city, and mutually agree that complete the public infrastructure according to the approved construction plans within a 2-year time frame. And the construction plans are reviewed based on the engineering design standards and the ordinance at the time. Public infrastructure includes drainage sediment basins, water main, sanitary sewer, storm sewer, curb and gutter, the paving, and ADA ramps. Sidewalks are also required, but typically that's part of the building permit. So throughout the process, once construction is noted as complete by the engineer of record, which is the developer's engineer, city staff review the installed infrastructure, compare it to the construction plans, note any discrepancies or incomplete items, and then once those added to the punch list, once those are corrected, then the certification process begins. There's a certificate of completion, which starts a 1-year warranty period. I kind of compare this to a substantial completion certificate. And then after a 1-year warranty, any deficiencies are noted and then repaired. And then the certificate of acceptance is then taken to council and approved. And that's where the city formally takes over maintenance and ownership of the roadway and the public infrastructure. Developers can sell lots as soon as plat and development agreements are filed, and then building permits are issued when the curb and gutter is installed and sanitary storm and water main are approved. So the some of the things that we've kind of noted in the process that could be tweaked, as developments often are not completed within a 2-year time frame. Home businesses are being built in partially completed subdivisions. There's some deviations or items not installed per the plans. Warranty items that aren't completed timely within the 1-year warranty. There's some proof rolls that aren't completed before paving. Then test data and as-built data isn't submitted, and erosion controls are not maintained. There are 14 active development agreements, which is a lot of developments. We've been pretty busy, and that's a good thing. 10 of the 14 have surpassed their expiration date, the 2-year warranty, and that ranges from 4 months roughly to almost 6.5 years, and it's the average about 2 years delinquent. Just kind of a note, of the 4 that are not past due, 3 of them will pass their expiration date in 2025 if that's not completed.
Councilman Peters?
Justin, which 3, do you know off the top of your head which 3 those are? If you don't, that's okay. I was just curious.
That the 3 that aren't
The ones that are up for, ones that are up.
in 2025, okay. There's Jern Schulte, which is down by 14th Avenue Southeast, Prairie Haven 2nd, and Williston 2nd. And Valley View 5th is actually in 2026, so that's got 2 construction seasons left. So these are a list of expired development agreements. And I have a map I can pull up later where these are, but some of them with the dates there, these are the 10 that are noted. They range from, I'll be honest, there's not a lot left to do in any of these. Some of them are ADA ramps. Some of them there's one that has a top lift remaining. There's sanitary sewer, some lift stations, riprap. In all these things, all these developments, there really isn't a lot left to do, but they just aren't complete yet. With some of the things that, our goal is to try to finish these developments. And some of the things that, according to the agreement, we can, as a city, complete the developments, and then assess those values back to the development, the adjacent properties. Another option is we can stop issuing building permits in these developments until all public infrastructure is installed. All these kind of have pluses and minuses. I'll go back to the first one. The developments, if the city would complete them, that comes out of the budget, and then you have to balance that with the maintenance of existing infrastructure. Stopping building permits isn't I don't know if anyone likes that idea. That stops home constructions. We could not plow or maintain infrastructure, essentially treat it as private infrastructure. There's a risk that, if it snows, that those folks that live on those roadways may not get the roadways cleared in a timely manner. We could refuse to enter into development agreements with the developers until the current past due projects are completed. That's certainly an option. We could do nothing, or we could strengthen the ordinance, Title 24, in our current development agreements. And we'll.
Councilman Tupper? Sorry to interrupt, Justin.
Well, there's got to be a reason for most of these not getting completed. Those current resources, the only one that I see that I would agree to would be do nothing. But I mean, we gotta get them up to date also, so that's not really a good answer neither, but there's gotta be a way of, and I'm not putting the blame on anybody, but we wanna work with developers, not against them, so gotta be a way we can figure out something to get these completed and keep them completed in the future, so we're not coming up here and talking about this 3 years from now, so.
Councilman Danforth?
Yeah, I got a couple questions, if I can go through. First of all, Justin, my first question of you is, what are you seeking from the council right now as it relates to our meeting and having this discussion? Answer that one, and I got two other follow-up questions, if you would.
There, I guess I can skip the next slide, kind of, there's a couple proposals for ordinances that we've been tossing around and potentially bringing to council. Ultimately, the 10 that are expired, we'd like to bring those development agreements to council and formally extend them for a year. By ordinance, we could extend them for 2 years because of, they're average about 2 years overdue, and there's just a little bit left. I think we could extend them for a year. So the ask would be to extend those formally, and then the second ask would be some of these ordinances, proposals, if any, appeal or just leave as is, so.
So really, you're looking for direction on how to proceed, really, not only tonight, but probably at some point at a council meeting.
Correct.
With proposal, okay. So a couple things regarding the development agreements. Are these not getting completed because the developers disagree with what's within the development agreement?
I think part of it is I don't know if anyone else wants to, there's some developers here.
And just for the record, I
Well-
know that they will be coming up. We're going to give,
Right,
and we're going to give them all a chance to speak, so.
but, so the question is the reason why these aren't getting completed, right? So, to me, if there's other issues that are driving the lack of completion, that's really different than it is if they're in disagreement, because then it drives straight to what we're having as requirements in our terms and conditions within our development agreements, correct? The solution to that is completely different. To do nothing, as an example, encourages the lack of completion in following through with development agreements. So the one thing we have to be really careful of in whatever we do, look, if it's the terms and our requirements, then let's look at fixing those and see what we can do. If it's not, then we have to enforce our terms. Because otherwise, we run the risk of dealing with the good old boys, right? We all know who they are. The good old boys, where we're doing something for one and maybe not the other, right? So it's hard to justify that. So my thing is I want to understand why they aren't being completed. And that's not pointing fingers, but unless we as a body understand what's driving the lack of completion, it's hard for me to give any direction. So that's what I hope to hear from you and anybody else that's sitting out here, so.
Councilman Dunn? Yep. Okay, back to you, Justin.
So to get the development agreements in agreement, I guess, I think the extending the development agreements for up to a year or up to 2 years is one thing that we look at possibly doing in the next few weeks. Some of the proposals for possible changes is clarify fines for not submitting density tests prior to paving, or fines for not installing or maintaining sediment controls, not submitting as-built. That's one thing. If you look at our ordinance, it's written that they should submit these, but there really isn't a clarity necessarily of what if they don't. And so we're just looking at a little bit of clarity there. And then for same thing with for not completing deadlines by the developments by the deadline. I liken this, comparing it to the capital improvement side. We have a term called liquidated damages. It'd be kind of comparable. If the contractor doesn't complete a project within the time frame, then there's liquidated damages. But there really isn't clarity in our ordinance, I don't believe. It could be clearer, I guess I will say that. The one I know there's going to be a lot of discussion about is requiring the bonds or a line of credit or a cashier check or some sort of escrow or surety with these development agreements. The current development agreements, we don't have that now, so these would be essentially for future developments. But there's pluses and minuses to each one of those. And then the last one is certificate of completion. Right now, that comes to council, and that's just more of it's a administration side. If council's okay with it, that'd be like having the staff sign off that it's certified complete, and then the only action would be acceptance by council. So those are some ideas that we've tossed around, trying to get some thoughts on how to move forward and how to complete these. It's really our goal.
Councilman Tupper.
Is there one item that kind of sticks out with a lot of development agreements that isn't getting completed?
I think ADA ramps is what I was thinking. The ADA ramps tend to be the ones that are the last.
Another one I see probably is finishing like second lifts on roads and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, there's most of them after last fall, most of second lifts are done. There's one that still has the first lift on it, but.
So sometimes do we take a whole development agreement in a whole section, let's say ABC developer is going to bring in 14 acres and we got a development agreement for this whole 14 acres. Is there a way of tiering that development agreement? Because now when you put it on there with the whole 14 acres, or say it's 28 acres or however many acres, now it's forcing them to do a lot of the development, things in the development agreement up front before the development moves forward. You see where I'm coming from? Mm-hmm. And when you're trying to do a whole development and get everything done in a whole development, a lot of time you get a lot of money stuck out before you're seeing a return on your investment. So, if that would be a way of looking at it, just set it in tiers. Like you got however many acres, you're going to have A, B, C, D, whichever. So we could check off a certain section of the development agreement.
I think it's up to the developer how they kind of phase it, but the construction plans go by phase. So like Valley View or River Ridge, they have several phases, and so each one kind of comes in separately, and there's separate development agreements for first, second, third, fourth.
All right.
That's
Interim city manager?
Yeah, so I think I think as far as handling the current ones that are expired, we will be bringing those forward. But I think going forward, I know Justin and his team is kind of proposing some changes to the ordinance. I think the idea of having the discussion here with council is to get some feedback of things that you're a little bit in favor of and things that you're just absolutely don't want to see, because then the next step would be that any suggestions would go to the planning commission with kind of their review, and then essentially come back to council with any other suggestions. So we're just kind of trying to get a feel of, from the council, and then I know some of the developers are here as well, to see what fits and maybe what doesn't. So, thank you.
Thanks. Councilman Peters?
Thank you, Mayor. I think the beauty with this form of government is we're hands-off, and the downside is that we're hands-off. So if some of the developers would come up and just give us some examples, we won't hold it against you, but we really need real-life examples of what the issues are, because I'm struggling understanding what to fix if I don't understand what the problem is.
And I will also ask the developers if they wanted to comment on any of the proposed ordinance changes as well. That would be most helpful. So just come on forward in an orderly fashion, and just please announce who you are for the viewing public and who you represent.
Okay. My name is Steve Horning. 2 of the 10 are mine. Isabella's first edition. The engineering partner and myself were in disagreement. They wanted a turning lane to go under 212. Where Dollar General is this is where the property's at, where Dollar General is on Highway 212. So I hired a firm out of Sioux Falls to see whether the turning lane was required to go both ways, to go east and west. And they came back with a determination. I think I got that, maybe 3 months ago or 4 months ago. So now I'm in a position to do that. So I look in 1908 is when I signed the agreement, and I didn't realize I put that in there, but I did sign it. So I look delinquent, but it's a moving target. I don't feel I'm delinquent. I decided after their recommendation that I'll do this spring. So that's Isabella's first. CAC's 4th edition is mine also, and the road was completed last year, 2014. We got a punch list. So 2014 is when I got the punch list, and I don't have it completed yet, but how can I be delinquent and I just got the punch list last year? So you got to give us a break on this deal. You're not going to get any more developments, Any comments?
Councilman Peters?
On the turning lane issue, Steve, if you could, I got a question for you. On the turning lane issue, you were talking to DOT on that? I missed that. Who were you visiting with?
Okay, first of all, it was in agreement. 212, they put a turning lane on 212. And this would be a turning lane required to go to 212, like right in front of Dollar General. Okay? So I didn't think it was required, so I hired a firm out of Sioux Falls, which the city agreed to review their recommendation. And so they came out with a recommendation that was required, so I'm going to do it. But this has been going on for a long time. So I'm, what do you have down there, 2018 or something like that I'm delinquent? Well, how do you know about, I didn't realize I was delinquent in either one of these because I've been working with it.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Any comment on that, Justin?
Isabella is one of those that it was signed in 2008, I think it was. It was a 10-year development agreement. We don't, now the standard is 2 years. So that was kind of a long-standing one. When Isabella was written, again, this is before my time, but there was according to the plans, there was a right turn lane. So we agreed that, if it's not needed, if an engineer says it's not needed, then we'll accept that. When they did the study, the turning lane is needed, so they're putting it in. And Mr. Hornig, he's done a really good job of keeping things on track. It's just, like I said, there's just a couple things hanging out there in both the developments that need to be finished.
Councilman Tupper?
Do we have a trigger that contacts these developers when their development agreement is expired? Or do we just, Marcy's shaking her head yes back there, so.
Yes, there is a couple of different triggers. So we have a tracker that tells us roughly how long they have. So if it's a 2-year, 10-year, we have a few of those 10 years out there. Isabella being one. And then what we'll do is we contact the developer. Previously, we contacted them via phone and email. Now we contact them via OpenGov, which is our permitting process. We're trying to get all communication through that so it's all tracked and there for the developer for review. Yep.
Councilman Peters?
I think I forgot my question now. Okay, so when a turning lane issue like that comes up, that's call it a conflict in the development agreement, if you will. Is there a process that we're extending it on the back end immediately if something like that unforeseen comes up? And I know this was a long-term development agreement, but I guess my question would be, if I'm Mr. Horning, is if something like that comes up that you weren't planning on, that takes time and effort, should there be, is there a process where you give them an extension? Or should that come in front of the council for an extension automatically?
Right now, the way the ordinance is set up is that it would any extensions come before council. So it's not something that staff can just extend.
Okay, follow up. So, are there triggers in place that would bring that back to us? Something like that? To me, that seems like something that takes quite a bit of consideration and time. I guess maybe this is rhetorical, but I feel like that should be something that we are aware of versus on the back end. That's the first time I'm hearing about that.
Yeah. This is one of the older ones, and I'm not trying to make excuses. I'm just explaining what happened is. It's one of the older ones, so when we went to try to close it out, looking at the plans and the development agreement, that's when we recognized that this turning lane was there. So, yeah, it would be better to catch it more on the front end, but when we went to try to close it out, that's when we caught it.
Councilman Danforth?
From what I hear in the case of Mr. Horning, I think that my sense is the frustration all comes on the back end of this thing that is like, in 2014, and now it's 10 years later and I just hear about it. It sounds like systematically, we need to be the drivers of annual review with the developers on open development agreements or whatever it is, because, and I'm not, this isn't pointing fingers, it's just facts. Seems like, and that's maybe where Mr. Peters was going with this, is it seems like from 2008 to 2018, the expiration of the development agreement, that's plenty of time to resolve this issue and know what's going to happen. You got 10 years to do it, somewhere in this process. And it's just now getting achieved, right? So now it's not 10 years, it's 16 years or whatever that number is. So it seems to me like we've got to be the drivers of these development agreements and their status. And granted, and did I hear you say we're not going to do 10-year ones anymore?
Correct.
Okay, so we're in 2-year. I think you got to have annual reviews with them that say, here's your punch list of where you got your open issues are and what's your status. Because they should have to answer to that. And even if that answer is, it doesn't look like we're going to get it done, whatever that is, they should have to answer to the punch list. They're the ones that sign the bottom line. So I think we're going to have to be the drivers of that. And if there's any issues, let's be proactive on addressing it. versus reactive when the date is up and we go, what are you gonna do? You missed your date. I'd rather have the conversation ahead of time, systematically, and get commitments from the developers or an understanding of why, because if I'm in our shoes, well, one thing I wanna do is I wanna understand, is it justified to extend them? Otherwise, we're gonna be doing that all the time. So justification, the understanding the reasons why these things don't occur, to me is really important. And the only way we're gonna know that is to stay on top of each and every one of them. And that is, if it's a 2-year agreement, at the end of the first year, you say, where are you at? And you go through it and make sure it's getting done. And 6 months later, if it's the end of, you got towards the end of a construction season, you see where you're at. You look at your punch list. That's where we gotta go. I think we have to get out in front of this thing and be proactive in management with the developers versus on the back end, which always creates problems. Creates frustration, creates a lot of issues.
And while Mr. Horning is coming up, Councilman Tupper, did you want to?
So my question is, by ordinance, we can't allow an extension unless it comes to council, correct? Is there a way of changing that ordinance that would give staff administration to, so let's say it's Mr. Horning now, he's not gonna do it right now because it's not construction season. But give him a 6 months extension to get it done administratively without having to bring it to council all the time. And that would take an ordinance change. Yep.
Yeah, Councilman Peters?
I love new ideas, Councilman Tupper, but I would put this in the same camp of like a conditional use permit or something like that. You'd want that to come in front of a body instead of having staff dictate extensions, because too much discretion involved. But I get the point of having it come back and having it trigger, so.
Mr. Horning?
Okay, I'm Steve Hoying again, and I've got another potential development that I'm considering. There's no way I can get it done in 2 years. It's a big project. The last one has 82 lots in it, okay? How are you gonna get that done in 2 years? I think it's impractical. Then I gotta come beg for an extension for what, another 6 months? Your timeframes are terrible here. It takes way longer than that to develop some property. So if you, instead of going 2 years, you won't go 10 years, go 4 years. Get out there a little longer, give me a little more time to do it. You know, sometimes the contractor, you can't get them lined up correct, and it's a team time. So the first guy's late, and then you got a chain reaction there. And the 2 years is a very short time period.
I'd be all in favor of that.
Mayor, can
Yep.
I ask staff just a question? So essentially, if we were to look at a time frame, do you think we would set that up as like a tiered? Like if it's a smaller development, it's a two, like something like that, so that you still keep, you know, if it's a small development, 2 years is enough? I don't know, staff?
I think we could explore that option, whether, depending on the size of the development, whether it's 2, 3, 4, whatever it might be, so, yeah.
Community Development Manager Hanton?
Thank you, Mayor. So I just wanted to add, you know, when they're looking at laying out a development and they look at the concept plan and then they do preliminary plan, and then, but the preliminary plan is just for a smaller phase. So they will phase out their development and make them into, they'll configure them so that they are attainable to complete within 2 years, is the idea behind that. Obviously, with certain developments like CAC's 4th edition, they platted it all at one time. So then that does make it difficult for completing that within the 2 years. But the 2-year time frame really comes into play because once a property is platted, then they can sell the lots, which is good, because then they can start recovering the overhead of what the development costs. But it's just that somebody living within that development then, an individual home owner or property owner, would potentially have to put up with the infrastructure improvements being outstanding or not completed when that time frame is extended. So just things to think about there.
Okay. Councilman Shetty?
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, thank you, Ms. Hatton. I guess that was one of my questions was, I'm sure there's a lot more information that and when we went from 10 years to 2 years previously. So that's why I'm sure there's, why we can't just go make it 4, 6, 8 years. I think we've got to look at this strategically, what's working. So I appreciate your information. That helps me a little bit in this thought process.
Councilman Peters?
Am I hearing it right that the council decided to make it 2 years instead of 10? Sorry, Colin.
That's an ordinance that it's a 2-year.
When did it change, or did it? A long time. Okay, all right, thanks.
All right. Mr. Paulson, I recognize who you are, but just for the sake of everyone else, would you please say your name and who you represent?
Thank you, Mayor. Colin Paulson, I'm here for J&J Land Sales. I guess I'll start by saying from being on the city side, this is not a new discussion. When I worked for the city, it was the same thing, going back and trying to get developers to do things. And obviously I fully admit that there are some issues out there. And but what's unique too is Watertown is well, it gives you unique development world compared to other communities. Yeah, we've never required bonds, at least from my recollection of the history of Watertown, where a lot of places do, and that puts a limit on who's going to develop in the first place, because not a lot of people can afford bonds. There's a lot of fees associated with that. There's a lot of interest accrued that you're missing out on. You have money tied up, so you have less capital to do other things. There's a lot of downsides to that, which I think Watertown's acknowledged in the past. But, the talks of this and the $500 fines per day for really just paperwork is asinine. And it actually, it kind of spits in the face of economic development that the mayor just talked about on the radio the other day. This will put an end to development in Watertown if this goes through like this. And I'm not saying that as a threat, or we have hard economic times right now, and I think everyone in this room can acknowledge that. And so a lot of times what we're seeing is, yeah, we agreed to 2 years, but we need to sell lots to make it even feasible. And we're not selling lots in Watertown. We've sold more lots in Millbank, South Dakota, than we have in Watertown in the last year. So that tells me that there's a problem. We need to do something to address that issue in Watertown, and this is not helping it. This is actually going to make it significantly worse. Just in the last year, Watertown's only added about 500 people to the population, and that is far behind everyone else in this state, at least the players in this state. And yeah, I'm going to throw it to, we don't have the help that other communities have. We don't have a development WDC. They're not doing anything for us. We have contacted them how many times to help us, and they have not. We have a new ice arena on one of our developments, and guess what? We haven't sold any commercial lots. Okay, maybe a couple, but not like it should be. And yeah, it goes back to the economic times, but we're some of the most reasonably priced lots in this entire state, and I've heard that from several developers around the state, a lot of builders, and we still have no traction at all. So, I mean, this whole discussion is hard to have, but we also have a utility that they're double or even sometimes triple dipping into the pockets of our community. And I know I brought that up when I was on the council, but it's gotten worse since then. Now developers are required to pay 100% of pipe costs. That's not been done in Watertown before. And that was a plus and it aided development. But now, guess what? Now we have that. That's gonna have to be translated into higher lot costs. Any fees associated with something like this would have to result in higher lot costs. So that means our community is paying more money to build, to even own a piece of property. We're trying to keep it as low as possible, and it's becoming impossible. And people complain that housing is so expensive. Yeah, houses can't be built for cheap anymore. They just can't. Construction costs alone, but lot costs factor in hugely into that. And now I'm going to get into something that some people don't want to talk about, but there have been political and personal attacks against developers in this town, and I can speak fully on that because I've been part of it. And I've seen other developers ran out of town because of it. So we sit here and ask why. Well, there's changing of standards. We've had agreements in place, and we've had the review process almost completed, and then we've had have former staff tell us that, nope, we're going to require completely different standards. And that costs us alone. I can count just a few items that cost J&J over $1 million. That's not helping the cost. City is not doing their part to help us. And yeah, I get it. A lot of people think that developers have all sorts of money. We don't. That's why it's so phased. And that's why we're behind on certain development agreements. Because we need to recover those costs somehow. And we do most of the work ourselves. Where some of these other developers in this room don't. We've actually done work for some of these developers. And that's also, I'm going to get to, specifically one of them, we were told that we had to go do some patching and some concrete work and some asphalt patching for them. It was agreed upon by the city staff. And don't get me wrong, we have a great staff in Watertown. I love working with them, and we try to work with them as much as possible. But as we were doing the process, we were then told that they wanted a whole new asphalt surface on there and not just the patching, which I totally understand, but you have to realize the cost to that. The cost significantly would have skyrocketed. And we had already been told that we needed to patch. So we already had paperwork, we had the plan in place, and we went to do that, and then they told us that we had to go replace an entire 2-inch mat. That's not helping things. We've also had staff members turn things over to the state instead of working with the developer, which have led to lawsuits, which turned in tens of thousands of dollars. I know a lot of you on the council and some of the staff, including the attorney, have been included in a lot of my emails back and forth with staff and some of the disagreements that we've had in place. And guess what? I hope that's all behind us. I had issues with some of the previous employees here, but that goes to talk about is those attacks on me and my employer, who I'm here representing, led to a lot of disagreement and a lot of money being spent outside of what's going on normally. We try to work with staff, like I said. If they call us and say there's an immediate need, we try to get there as soon as possible. But we also run a construction company that we're trying to make this all work. And so we have people everywhere. We don't have people just dedicated to just developments. We have, all over the eastern side of South Dakota and western Minnesota. So we try to get them here as fast as possible, but also we don't do 100% of things ourselves. We did recently just start a concrete crew because we cannot find subcontractors to do this work. And I know Mr. Horning mentioned that. And then that becomes a scheduling conflict too. If we can't get to it, or if a subcontractor's like, I'll be there this week of August, well, then we're probably not getting asphalt, or we're not getting something until the following year, because that scheduling overlap just doesn't happen. There's so many things that need to happen in sequential order in a development, and we can't just, I mean, 2 years is hard right now. It is doable in most situations, and I get that that's why there's phasing, but I'm just explaining some of the issues that we've ran into, especially since 2020. That's been, I mean, it's been pretty brutal, especially concrete. And I'm being upfront with you. Concrete is very, very hard to get done in this town. And I've been instructed to tell you that J&J already has a foot out the door because of prior issues. This will push us further, and I don't want that. I love this community, and that's why I've been so involved in it in the past, and that's why I'm here. But it makes it really hard when things like this make life in general hard. And I get why Jamie and Jeremy are very frustrated, because guess what? It's affecting their bottom dollar. It's affecting every one of these developers' bottom dollar. And it's money that they don't have usually. So guess what? We're borrowing from the bank. We already have fees associated with that. Then if we have to put a bond forward, there's even more, and it's crazy. But, you know, I just urge you guys to find a different solution that, for one, allows people to buy more affordably, but two, to get more developers involved, because that's where we're at right now. I want to see this community grow, and I know a lot of other people do too. And right now, we're floundering, and I'm just being completely honest with all of you.
Councilman Peters?
I beat you, Mike. That was faster. Thank you for that, Colin. I appreciate the honesty. The question I'd have back to you would be, what are some suggestions we can work towards? Like, what do you think we should implement? Because I totally agree. Anything that we implement here is going to be produced in the form of increased lot costs. I mean, that we're not going to be asking developers to carry those burdens. So what specifically can we be doing, or should we be implementing that could be helpful?
Specifically, if to get WDC more involved, so there's actually programs out there that, and it's not all about the developer, it's more so about the buyer. We need buyers more involved in this community. That's only going to help everyone. It's going to help this entire community because there's going to be more money around and more building, more things, more people are going to want to come here, more things are going to want to come. You know, people complain about the stores in this town or the restaurants in this town because we don't have enough, we don't have this, we don't have that. Well, guess what? It starts with population. It starts with economic growth.
You've been talking to my wife, it sounds like.
And so if we could just somehow work with the program, and I don't know what the city's aspect is. I'm not gonna lie, I did try to work with the previous manager on that, and I was told that there's nothing that we could do. I was straight up told that. And so I don't know what that looks like, Kyle, or sorry, Councilman Peters. But if there's something that we can do to do that, I think that's gonna help and go a long way.
Oh, follow up?
That's exactly what I'm looking for. I would just throw out there for this group that there's other communities. I know Mitchell, they have a homeowner, home buyer program where they give like a couple $1,000s to home buyers if they're moving in. I think that there's a match program as well with another entity down there in Mitchell, but there are other communities in South Dakota where they do some kind of grant up front through the Economic Development Group. And I could look into those more, but I would confirm what Colin's saying here, that there are programs. I think that's a little bit outside of probably this discussion, but I agree WDC needs to be engaged. if it's the extension on the development agreement in terms of timing, I think we can easily do that. If there's anything else that we can be doing to be more friendly, I think, we see the sales tax revenue come in month after month. We see the growth. I think we're all ears to figure out what we can do to be creative. So, thank you.
Councilman Danforth.
Yeah. Colin, I'm going to ask you a question. You use this term several times, and I want to understand it. And then I got another statement to make. But you said, this is going to. This is going to. And my understanding, there's nothing proposed. This is discussion about where we go, what we do, how we do it. You're giving me the impression like something has occurred here already that apparently I either don't know about or something, but you use that term. Can you explain that a little bit? Because that's a different scenario than where I feel I'm at on this time, trying to understand the issue and the problem and where we go. I'm getting the impression from you that you think something's been answered to and decided upon that is additionally going to have adverse effect to developers. Can you go with that for a second?
Councilman Danforth, thank you. Yeah, I guess we were sent an email saying that they were talking about implementing daily $500 fines for neglecting to submit required density tests and as-built drawings, and that's what I referred to as paperwork. Yeah, I get that those need to be in, but $500 fines, that's crazy, actually, especially when there's really one engineer in town that does any of that, and so sometimes it takes a while to get all that stuff. And then they talk about bonds.
Possibility of, or the discussion of that,
Correct.
right?
And they're saying that they're proposed changes in the email. That's what they're saying. And so that's what I was referring to is surety bonds and these $500 fines.
Am I wrong that I haven't received anything that's actually would indicate proposed changes? What I'd like to do, Justin, did that email come out of your department? Could that be sent at least to me? I'd like to at least understand what I'm dealing with here, if I could. The second thing I think that's important, and Colin, this isn't really you.
I think we actually have a copy. Is that right?
Okay. And your name, sir? Your name? Oh, all right. Yeah, I don't know if I did. 25 cents? One thing to keep in mind, and I think this is important, the WDC is its own entity. And the city is allowed via, I don't know, ordinance or home rule charter or something, we're allowed one seat, I believe, on there. And I think our designee on that is the city manager. So we do have representation there when we don't have the say. From this side of the desk, the only say that we have is whether we support them financially or not. So I know the council gets hit a lot. I personally read it, I hear it once in a while that the council's not doing our job on the development, bringing in new businesses and such. And we do have a role there, but we don't have the role. We have an entity that it's primarily responsible for that. The second thing is the municipal utilities. They are the City of Watertown municipal utilities, of which they are governed on their own. We have no say as to what their policies are and what they do. Again, we have liaison representation to their board, but that's non-voting and there's no say there. Colin and I agree wholeheartedly that this all needs to work together somehow. But we got to understand that this body here, we don't have the say in those other cases. But somehow we have to, as a community, do a better job of understanding that we all have to have a purpose that all works together. And I think that's probably what you're saying. And I agree with that. And we've had individuals have talked sometimes about some of the things that would help that we can do. And a big part of what we need to do is start discussion. Because individually, none of us are able to fix anything. But as a working body, we're all connected at the hip, albeit separate, then we can get things done. But unless we do that, it doesn't work. And I think that's maybe where you're going with some of those comments, is there's issues there.
Correct,
So we
Councilman.
got to have discussion.
And honestly, going back to Councilman Peters' point too, is I'm not saying maybe fully defund or take away that money, but you could maybe better utilize that money to aid in certain stuff from a city standpoint instead of sending it. And I know both entities receive quite a bit of tax dollars, and I think we could better utilize that money at this point. I'm not saying it can't be corrected, but I think right now what we're seeing on the development side, trying to work with them, is it's impossible. And so as a developer, I'd rather come to you as a councilman that represents this entire community and ask you for the help instead of going to an unelected board and they say, no, there's nothing we can do. So that's just, I guess that's where we're coming at from a developer, is we'd rather work with you guys and utilize that money, those tax dollars that were intended for this purpose in the first place, to move in that direction.
I think one of the things that what we can do from this side of the table and the staff that we have here is we need to clearly understand what works and doesn't work. We're on the wrong side of this thing to understand that. Colin, you talked about a number of things today, and to me, the devil's in the detail, right? And so there's a lot of things that, for me to really gain any level of understanding and knowledge, it's almost like we just need to sit down and go through real detail and understand why. But I do think, that we need to understand what our requirements are, what works and what doesn't work, or are there opportunities for them to work differently at times? I think we can challenge ourselves with what our requirements and standards are. They should be justified in some manner. We're always going to have some level of disagreement and such. That's just natural. But I think we need to work through the requirements first, because that's what drives any of these development agreements, drives your efforts or anybody else's efforts. So, I think we've got to understand, if I looked at it and said, what's the top 1 or 2 or 3 things in our requirements currently that's creating a problem for developers? What are they? And is it something that we can do something about? But unless I really know specifically what the issues are, it's hard to be in the corrective mode. How do we fix it if we don't know what it is? And then from a staff standpoint, we've got to look at what those concerns are and say, here's what we can do, or no, we can't do it because of this. Really, when it's all said and done, most of this comes down to dollars. It does. Who bears the cost? So just like as a developer, your funds are limited, so are they on the city side as well, because we got a lot of allocations of those things. So I think we need to understand where we agree and where we disagree in the requirements and the processes being used, and then we can go to fix problems or potentially at least discuss them.
Any further council discussion on that? All right, invite the next person up.
I'm Greg Hofteser, representing High Plains Development Corporation. We had one of them up there, and I mean, Kyle wanted to know what some of the issues are, and some of them are really small issues as to why these development agreements might expire. That particular one was some bolts that got put into a storm sewer system that didn't get clipped by the underground people, and so that was holding up the certificate of completion. And in the meantime, our engineer did a hydrology study. This is all from minor, I pay people to do this because I don't have heavy equipment and I'm not an engineer. So he did a hydrology study and found out that the bolts were not going to come into play with any 100-year event or 500-year event or whatever the criteria of the bar had to be met. And it was okayed, but I don't know if it ever, I don't know if the communication between the city and our I don't know who dropped the ball, but I get the emails, I called the engineer, he says, I've got a hydrology study. He said, short of greasing up somebody's hips and sliding them into that storm sewer to clip the bolts, he said, this is what we've got to do, and he did it. I just assumed it was done, and then I get an email saying, you know, this is expiring, and so, you know, that's an example of that, why they can expire. It's kind of a minor issue, but yet it did expire, and I know the buck needs to stop somewhere, and I suppose it's with the developer. So I don't know if the communication between the city and the engineer there, now we've got another one that I think will be expiring this year. And from my understanding, the only issue is a 12-foot piece of fillet that somehow where it meets the inlet for the storm sewer is allowing, you know, a couple inches of water to go out into the blacktop. You know, and yeah, it's not right. The blacktop will wear out over time. It should stay in the fillet in the concrete. You know, short of taking a 9mm and putting it to the head of a concrete guy to get him to pour a 12-foot piece of fillet in the fall when they're trying to wrap things up, I mean, we couldn't get it done. So that's going to expire this year because of a 12-foot piece of fillet that, and, you know, unfortunately, the people who put it in are no longer in business. So, you know, we're trying to find, you know, then you get a third party who comes in and you're asking them to do this little tiny job, and it's just about impossible to find someone to do that. I'm going to call in a favor this summer, so we'll get it done. But that's an example of a really, in the whole scheme of the project, a tiny little thing that's holding up, you know, getting the certificate of completion. And, you know, I would echo the concerns of adding any more expense. I mean, I know their proposals, so I understand this is a discussion. But we would hope that, you know, those types of things wouldn't, you know, we don't have, you know, to get a bond, I called an insurance person, they said there's so many different types of bonds that you have to, you know, the monetary amount, but from my understanding from our engineers, they're about 1% is what he was thinking. So if you take, you know, one of our plats that would be anywhere from $700,000 to $1 million just to bring in that 1.5 or 2 blocks of lots. And, you know, from the time you're issuing permits and between the warranties over, I mean, it could add $15,000 to $30,000 to that plat. Now, if I've got 20 lots in there, I'm adding $1,500 to each lot because of the bonding. You know, but I mean, I understand bonding. You know, but you know, if the city's getting harmed because there's a developer comes in and takes off with half the stuff done, now the city, I mean, that's my taxpayer dollars too. I mean, I don't want that, but I don't know if the city has ever been harmed by something like that or what. I know the issue is to push these along and get these things done before they expire, but, you know, hopefully it's not by penalties and, you know, because that's just going to get added to the lot price. And I was at that Affordable Housing Summit, you know, a few months ago at the Goss, and it seems like we'd be moving in the opposite direction, you know, some of the discussions we had there, so.
All right, thank you. Councilman Shetty?
Thank you, Mr. Hofteaser. Just a quick question.
Oh.
Hey, Greg.
Oh, okay.
One more quick question for you, just a quick follow-up. The development, is it a 2-year contract? Is that, or the development agreement, was it a 2-year?
Yeah.
On yours? Okay, I
Yep.
just want to clarify that just for, as I'm working through all the process here.
And Marcy Luno?
Yes, Council. I just want to clarify a few things for Greg's. So the last one that he referenced is River Ridge 8th, and that one is not expired. We have a certificate of completion. It is in the warranty process, and he has until, I believe, the end of the construction season to finish. He needs 3 things on that one. It's as-built, possibly densities, and then it's a piece of curb that's blocking flow. And that needs to be fixed.
But it expires this year, right?
The warranty, yes,
Yeah.
the warranty expires this year. But you're in warranty, we're talking about ones where the development agreement has gone past.
Okay.
So just clarifying that for council as well. And then, the first one he talked about, there is more than just the bolts. There's a few other items on that, including density reports that.
Well, that's from Colin, hasn't gotten you those yet. Well, see, there you go. I pay someone to do that and assume it's done.
Yeah.
Can't always assume, so.
And Mr. Hofteaser, do you have specific recommendations on improvements the council could consider?
Oh, boy, I tell you, it's, developing and building, I don't want to, we started this in the 90s, so it's gone back a long ways, but it's like herding cats. It's harder today to do a development. It's harder to build a house. I know Mr. Horning alluded to the fact that if you're building a house and your electrician says he'll be there on the 1st, but for some reason he doesn't make it till the 15th, you can't have it sheetrock till the electrical goes in. So your sheetrocker says, hey, I'm ready to come on the 15th. And he said, well, my electrician's not done. He said, well, I got a big job down at Ponset. I'll be tied up for 2 months. So now what do? You scramble to find another sheetrocker, or do you wait 2 months for him to come back from Ponset? I mean, it's just, I'm going to say everything is just, it takes time. It's like herding cats. It's like, and if someone holds you up, the whole string is down the line. And then November comes and you're into next spring. I don't know if there's an easy answer. My biggest concern, we want to work through these, and I don't know what my engineer's workload is, but maybe he needs to hire another engineer, because that's disappointing to hear that. I mean, we'd like to get these things done, and I don't, and ultimately the buck stops with us. But again, I can't do density tests, and I can't put that on paper and get it to the city. So I've got to defer to him, and we pay them to do that. So I'll ride herd on that as much as I can. But as far as I think it's communication is big. I just my biggest concern was just not adding any more expense to this whole deal. It's just not what I wanted to see, because it just some of the things that over the years things have changed, and it just doesn't seem like it doesn't change to where it gets less risky or less money to develop. It's always more money to develop, and I was just hoping we wouldn't move in that direction here. Just keep communication open. Maybe we've got to develop a system of flags that come up, and we've got to get in contact with these people. I know, after this experience, if nothing else that's come out of this is, my engineer might not like it, but I'm going to be calling him more often and finding out where he's at and what he needs to get to the city to satisfy these things. Because I don't want him hanging out there either. We want to move on.
Councilman Beeler?
Thank you, Mayor. Greg, couple of things. I believe that things are more difficult these days, especially with subcontractors and development. No doubt. I mean, we all see that. I've heard that from how many people? I need some concrete work done. Well, it's going to be 2 years to get it done. The environment's changed, I think. So from that standpoint, I can see, you would need more time in some of these instances. But my question for you, maybe for all the folks in here, is what is different now? I mean, how is it more difficult for you working with the government here, working with city government? Where are we having issues currently with how we handle those things compared to what we did in the past? How could we be more friendly as a city government, man, to help you to get your job done easier and faster? But, I think that the extension makes sense. I'll just say that, because of the issues that we have with subcontractors.
Boy, we're going to need a case of beer in a couple hours to solve that problem.
We can make that happen.
Somebody can.
I would say, we turned our first shovel of dirt in '97. And at that time, my parents had owned this land for a long time and always dreamt of developing it. Long story short, we thought we wanted an engineer who thought outside the box. So we went to Sioux Falls and some guy that had developed some hilly country, because we got the hills on ours, and they came out of the first. Now, this is a whole different administration, but I'm going to get to the point in a minute. They came out of the meeting and said, and they've developed land in Madison and Mitchell and Sioux Falls and Brandon, and they said they had never, ever experienced anything, because they were just, they didn't really have a process for bringing a plat in. It was just kind of like, well, whatever, or maybe you should do this, or maybe you should do that. And it got better. But I would say the biggest problem over the last, 25 years, it has been a lack of consistency. So it's just because you didn't, from one plat to the next, you just didn't know what to expect. There'd be a different, a mayor, there'd be a different, but I think it's gotten better by, you need to pass ordinances. You need to have black and white. So I can tear a sheet off or go onto a website and look at it and say, if I want to develop this land, what do I have to do it? What's required of me? At least the parameters, not, there's too many details so I would say the lack of consistency would be the biggest issue. So if you could, if there's any, and it's never going to be perfect. And every development's different. I mean, the biggest thing I would say is usually when we come to these meetings, people generally want to help each other. We're all from Watertown. We're not sitting here trying to fight each other. It's just, we got to come to a mutual agreement as far as to make it less risky to develop land, because it is, and I know this from developers don't have money. Well, we do, here's the deal is most people don't understand the risk involved. You don't make money till the last 25% of your development is sold. You sell the lot, you just stick it back in, you sell the lot. You do that for 20, 25 years. And you hope, within that time frame, things don't go south completely. But it's a big risk, and I think the general consensus is, people that don't understand it think that there's a lot of money to be made, so they, they're all in favor. The guy on the street might be in favor of just piling more onto them. They got all kinds of money. Let's just pile that onto them. They should put this in. They should put that in. They should dedicate all the parkland. They should put water and sewer into the park. They should put sidewalk into the, it was just like, it keeps piling up. And so I would say the lack of consistency. How to resolve that? It's gotten a lot better lately, I'll say. I think the consistency is better. You know what to expect. I think, we've worked well with the city. It's just, when I saw this, the proposals, the biggest thing was, let's not add cost to it. That's just, it's already a huge risk. We don't need to do that.
Councilman Beeler, anything else?
No, thank you, Greg.
All right, Councilman Tupper.
Well, first off, I know the mayor has asked for this for quite a while. I mean, a lot of conversations that we need to hear from the developers, and this is a great start, and I think it's just a start, and we want to work with you. We don't want to work against you. But I also remember sitting on this side of the desk when we had to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to correct problems from some developers. I'm not pointing fingers. That roads that broke up, that was part of the city's fault because we didn't have those checks and balances. Mm-hmm. So it's got to work for everybody, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And I think this is a good start to that. So thank you, guys.
Yep. Councilman Shetty?
Thank you. One thing that, there's quite a few items that are mentioned tonight that just helps clarify some questions I'm sure we all have. One thing that you had mentioned, Mr. Hofteaser, was what to expect. And I believe you were saying it's probably gotten a little bit better, but I want to parallel that to Reed Peterson, our building official in that side of the city where he's working with contractors and home building. He's putting together, the last year or so, he's been putting together a list of what to expect if you're doing a bathroom remodel. Here's the code. Here's what's expected, the measurements, the sizes. Now you can, as long as you're within the minimums of that. If you're doing a deck, here's exactly what's expected. So that way, when it comes time to go back and check and make sure that make sure everything's right, the builder will have what's expected up front, and it's going to be done in a way where it makes it simple, so it's not lost in the shuffle of all this detail. He's trying to come up with a way to communicate where it's got the detail needed, but yet in a way that's simple to look at. And then when it comes time to inspect, it actually makes in theory, it's going to make the inspections go much better as well. So it sounds like part of what we're talking about today is just continuing to work in our engineering department, which it sounds like they may be already in this degree, but to continue working on a way that we can better communicate, we can better what's expected, to be able to follow up. So I guess I look forward to us continuing to improve in that as well. So I just wanted to share that little insight.
Thank you, Mr. Hofteaser. Is there anyone else who'd like to come up?
My name's Scott Calvert. I'm from Austin Engineering. I don't know if we still have the proposed changes up there. Or is it that's possible? Oh, there we go. So I guess the two that
I'm sorry, could I have you restate your name and who you're representing?
Scott Calvert from Austin Engineering.
Okay, thank you.
We represent, I guess, the developers that have spoken so far too. I guess when we, on the, sorry, we changed slides. Was that the proposed? I guess it was on a different sheet, but I know they had said that they want, density test completed and submitted before paving, which the thing about the density test is a lot of times before the paving is usually in the fall, it seems like on the developments lately. So we do it kind of the day before, and then they're ready to pave. So I guess the only thing I would say there is that there should probably be a timeline set up. Is how we've been doing it so far is we get the as-built and the density test compiled, send them up when the warranty phase is expired, I guess, when the city's ready to hand it over. If there would be a different timeline, that would be fine, but I think that there should be some time allotted to it instead of saying before it's paved, because that might cause an issue.
Engineer Peterson?
That's all I was going to say.
Kind of the thought process of getting the density test prior to paving is if you get them before paving, then you have an opportunity to fix if there is an issue. If you get them after the fact, then it becomes, well, okay, now what do we do? So that's why we're, as an engineering division, we're trying to push prior to paving. So I understand the timing too.
And I would agree the density tests have to be completed before paving. It's just a lot of times in the fall is our busy time of the year, basically. So that's kind of where it runs into, they're not maybe going to be able to get some of these roads paved because they come in, they prep the subgrade, they bring the gravel in right away, and then when the gravel's done, they want to pave it because otherwise it ends up raining on it. They have to fix off spots, stuff like that. So I guess that was.
Councilman Danforth?
Mr. Calvert?
And I guess he reminded me, we take the test before we sign off on it beforehand anyway. I mean, basically that's, we let the contractor know that they're good to pave. I don't think the city does really any review after that of them. I mean, basically they want to make sure that they are done, which, I mean, they are being completed. It's just more of a paperwork, during the summer during the fall, typically, when we're really busy, we aren't able to submit those prior to paving. And I guess there's really nothing written when they're supposed to be submitted. So, they talk about I guess where I have seen, Justin seems to think no? Okay.
You're right.
So that's where, they say we're delinquent on them, but really there's no time when they're supposed to be submitted. So we've just been submitting them all with the as-built at the end of the warranty period is kind of how we've been doing it, I guess. But yeah, as long as there's enough time to complete them, we're fine with that. It's just, as long as it's something that makes sense, that doesn't, slow down the development, I guess, unnecessarily.
All right, thank you. Councilman Danforth?
I'm very confused. But it sounds to me like Justin understands the issue, if I'm reading because you're saying that you need to do it before paving. He's saying our requirements to do it before paving, and to me, those are the same statements. But you're saying it's the timing of it related to when you report it.
Right.
So
Submitting the
it
paper.
sounds like a language issue and a requirement issue. I obviously you want to do it before paving. Now it's just a matter of how do you do it so that you get time to the staff. So Justin, are you in agreement that there's something there?
Yeah, I understand that it's a rush in the fall. As engineering division, our concern is making sure that the roadway meets, or the grading underneath the roadway meets density before they pave. Because you can't really fix it after they pave. It's definitely more expensive for the developer after they pave. So we want to just make sure that it meets density. If Austin's signing off and says it meets density even before we have the reports, that's one thing.
Is that acceptable? It puts a lot of
Pressure.
and responsibility and liability on them. It's just, I don't want to get into that, but it just sounds like you're both saying the same thing in general terms. It's a matter of the timing of it and how it gets to the city if that's the requirement for confirmation and approval before you pave. So as you guys were talking, it was confusing to me because it sounded like you're both saying the same thing, so.
Yeah,
I think I understand it, but.
I guess just to clarify, yeah, there's two, we run the tests and then report, the findings. When we run the test, we know if it's good or not. And then we need to compile those tests and then submit them to the city, I guess. And it would just be, if we had some amount of time, even after paving, as long as, we're running the test beforehand, I guess is all. Especially when they're talking about, levying fines if they're not submitted, because if it's time to pave, they're just going to pave, I guess. As long as, if the tests aren't there, they're not going to do it, but just because they're not submitted, where they'll just have to pave if they're ready for it. But I guess I don't want to be holding up the development just on a little bit of paperwork, I guess. If that makes sense.
All right, thank you. Any further questions for Mr. Calvert? All right. Anyone else would like to come up and testify? Or what? It works.
I'm not sure, Mayor, if I was going to testify. Dave Weigel, Director of Project Management for the Mother of God Monastery, Harmony Hill. We were blessed to be on one of the line items on the list. In our particular case, in listening to this great discussion, first off, I want to call out, I'm new to my position within the last year, and Marcy and her team, you don't always hear it, but she's been tremendously helpful, even to the point where the day we did a walkthrough, it was probably 50 below wind chill factor, and Marcy was right there explaining everything on that particular street, what has to be done, why it has to be done, all of that. So I appreciate the education that I've gotten in a short amount of time. In our particular case, it's all in the timing, and that's, I don't know, Mr. Danforth, you've asked the question a few times. I don't know if it doesn't sound like to me there's like one or two top things, but it seems to me, in living for a lot of years in Watertown, one is we have a very short construction season. I work for the Sisters, and they got a direct line to somebody. They can't change that. It's going to be, the season's the season. And then also, I think, just based on limitation of contractors, that do that specialized work, be it asphalt or concrete or dirt work. But we're not disagreeing with our name on the list. It's just we're waiting. We're waiting for those things to be completed. And I don't know if it's a common theme, but I would imagine a lot of developers, it is a waiting game. Greg made a good point too. If one subcontractor's 2 weeks behind, it's not just that guy. It affects everybody down the line. We're building the new, remodeling the daycare project at St. Anne's, our little village. We're on schedule. We're optimistic, but any little hiccup can make a difference. And there again, I'm going to thank the city for working with our contractor Catalyst on a lot of details for us to continue that project to go. I think in my case, I'm just pleased because I'm kind of the new guy in this realm. And so when I call the city and say, I don't know what I'm talking about, can you help me out? I'm very, very appreciative of the responses. So I just want to say that I'm here on behalf of Harmony Hill.
All right, thank you. Anyone else would like to testify or add anything else? All right, council, any comments? I guess I could say at this point, I'm not in favor of adding to any of the costs, just straight up. In fact, if anything, I'd like to do the opposite and probably find a way to incentivize the development and make it easier. And I know that I know that would require also WDC, which is something that I've been wanting to do for quite some time, and I know that they want to as well. I want to thank Mr. Weidel and actually others have said nice things about our staff as well, and that's great to hear because I think that there's a misconception out there that the staff enjoys creating problems, and that's just not true. And I don't think, and I know also from the developers, I can say with good faith, I mean, I don't know exactly, but it's like none of you want to run over. Yeah, I mean, you just want to get the job done and move on to the next one and make money. And so it's like, I think it's communication is one thing that I've heard a lot about. And I think that that's obviously a big one because it's hard to guess what someone else is thinking of. You have to be clear, you have to express that. So, excuse me, communication would be key. So I thank the engineering department and Engineer Peterson for bringing forward ideas. Me personally, just not in favor right now. I think if anything, I'd like to hear more ideas on what we can do to make it easier, more streamlined. It's nice to hear that there have been improvements made in regard to the changes that had been expressed, and I know that in the past, the changes from one mayor to the other brought incredibly challenging shifts in political winds that would have ramifications throughout the entire community, and that was one of the reasons why the community voted for the city manager form of government, which I also understand had posed problems with at least one developer, but I think it's also with several. Because, and that's where council, I think we need to be on top of it and be aware of what's happening with the developers, because if, depending on what's happening, whoever is in charge, whether it be a city manager or mayor, if the person in charge is communicating directly with developers but not communicating that back to council, we have to be on top of that to stop that from happening. Any other comments? To all the developers, so I have the idea of perhaps being flexible with the timing, extending the permits. I would be in favor of at least exploring that as a possibility. I understand Councilman Peters suggested against letting staff handle some extensions on their own. I guess I can understand that as well. That one I don't get personally, but trying to think of what other concrete ideas were brought forward. I do know Mr. Paulson commented upon changing rules after something had already started. That's also something that we don't want to do. So, Engineer Peterson?
I guess I just wanted to just get a little bit of clarity. As far as the ordinance proposals, it sounds like probably nothing. But the extending development agreements, that by ordinance right now has to be brought to council. So I would plan on, or we would plan on bringing that to the group in an upcoming council meeting to extend the existing development agreements. Am I hearing? that correct?
I would be in favor. Councilman Danforth?
You know, through this process, one of the things that I've been sitting here thinking about is, you know, we've got two parties to this, and that's the city and the developer, and we come up with this development agreement. And within that development agreement, there are things that, if I'm the developer, that I'm responsible for, I'm committed to. So my question is, who's responsible for managing that? That says, yep, this is what I'm doing, and oops, that's not gonna happen, so it's my responsibility to get it done. Maybe I should get a hold of the city and let them know I've got this issue. Because at that point, the terms are set. The responsibility of communicating if it's not gonna happen should fall on the developers. Because if we're gonna get a request to extend a development agreement, that's a contract. If we get that, we should understand why it's necessary, why it's needed, and that should be a request from the developer to the council, so that we understand their position and we understand, if, you know, whatever that is. But, so that's more procedural, but maybe I'm looking at that wrong, but I know that if I have a contract that I'm responsible to certain aspects of that contract, well, then if I'm not gonna make my payment to the bank, I better let them know I'm gonna be late and why and what I'm doing. And I see that as no different here, is otherwise it puts staff and this council in a very tough situation. We need to understand why. And I think the ownership of responsibility, the city has our side of that to communicate, and I think the developer does. And I think if it's an extension that truly is related to issues on the developer side, they should make a request. That's what should come to this council, in my opinion.
Councilman Peters?
Yeah, I was just gonna give maybe a real-life example. I know we don't like to compare ourselves to other communities, but we're in the process of doing a development agreement down in North Sioux City right now. And we had to make a change we communicated between ourselves as the developers and the staff, and then the staff let council know right away what was gonna happen, so we could go back in front of council to get it approved or denied in that instance. So this one's a little bit confusing. I shouldn't say confusing, it's a little bit more lengthy because there's a TIF involved with this one, but my point here is that we're over communicating with the staff and the staff is over communicating with the council. And there isn't a hiccup in the system because of the communication piece. And I think what Councilman Danforth is saying is that we need to just be talking, and we don't know what we don't know. So this is the first time I'm hearing about almost all of this stuff. And I feel like I'm not doing my job to the community unless I do know about it. So I guess my ask would be that we don't do the fees, we don't get crazy with all these changes, if you will, and just communicate if something comes up. I think we're a small enough community where we can be nimble if it's reasonable, but again, we don't know what we don't know. So I know we're not taking action tonight, but my suggestion would be that we certainly don't do the $500 daily fees until we get more of a rhythm of where we're heading with these extensions, and then bring the changes to the council and the extensions. And I thank you guys very much for all coming. This has been a good discussion.
Interim City Manager Bob Zine?
Oh, thank you, Mayor. I did get a little bit from the conversation, though, that within the ordinance is the 2-year requirement. I do think staff will work toward maybe looking at some type of tiered system based off of development size. Maybe 2 years works for the smaller. When they're bigger, maybe it's 4. But we will just kind of look at that, bring forward some options to council. And then also, it seemed like there was a little bit of conversation about just kind of knowing what those requirements are, maybe in a simplified way versus knowing everything. So maybe engineering staff will definitely work towards getting a clear checklist for developers too, so it's an easy to understand process as well. So, thank you.
I do like that idea of the checklist. Councilman Shetty?
Thank you. Yes, and I appreciate that. That was, just using that example earlier with the building official, and maybe we already have some of this in place. I'm not saying we're coming up with something new, but imagine having that form, imagine having that communication, as others have suggested. I guess I picture even a possible procedure of an annual follow-up, and maybe there's stuff we do already, but imagine just annually, instead of waiting till the 2-year period or whatever, until the end of the development agreement, just do an annual follow-up. Okay, where are we at? What's been done? What's not been done? And it'll add the communication. It'll I think help everybody, maybe even help a developer. Maybe there's a blind spot that they missed. Maybe it'll help see the blind spot as well too. So maybe it sounds like it is more procedurally how we can improve the work together, developer, city, versus just coming up with more fines or more ways to police the thing. So I do again appreciate this conversation tonight. Hopefully this gets us to improve even more so. And thank you for everybody that's here helping us work on this together.
Quick clarification from Councilman Peters.
Well, I just want to say quick, I don't at all fault the staff for any of this. We've got some changes in leadership, and you guys were the ones that brought this to us because you thought we should talk about it. So I don't want this to be we're not mad at the staff or slighting the staff at all. In fact, I'm complimenting you that you'd bring this forward so we can have the discussion, because I've been on council for almost 2 years and we've never had anything like this before. So thank you guys.
Councilman Tupper.
That was part of what I was going to get at, and we asked the staff to get more involved with, as Councilman Shetty said a minute ago, to do some checks and balances as we're moving along. But also I want to reiterate the fact that city engineer told us just earlier tonight, introduced us to his new help. First time in 5 years they've been fully staffed. So maybe now that they're fully staffed, some of that stuff can work a little bit simpler too. So they've been holding the ship running pretty good, short staffed. So maybe a lot of those things can work a little smoother. So thank you.
It's not much different than waiting on subcontractors for drywall or electrical, because when we were short-staffed, it just piles up on the people that are there. I would be curious if any of the developers or anybody else has heard of programs to incentivize people becoming subcontractors, learning some of these skills, working with LATC. I know I've been working with a young gentleman, trying to work with him to connect him on some projects like this. He's kind of a general contractor, and maybe we need more of that and just communicating. I do want to clarify one other thing. So I was pretty certain of this, and then Councilman Tupper actually texted Chris Clifton over at the WDC. The WDC does have a housing program. I'm not exactly sure what it is. Perhaps it could be $6,000. Yeah, I thought it was going to be $5,000, but we could do something more with that. I also know that there are programs with the CVB and other organizations in town that actually try to make things more appealing to move to Watertown. And I've long thought that the fragmentation, lack of communication with all of our different entities in town has been something that has not been helping. And that means with the utilities, with the WDC, CVB, Chamber of Commerce, city, developers, everyone. I think we could be better. I like how Councilman Peters said it. We're small enough to be nimble, and I think we could do better at that. Any further commentary? I want to thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you very much. And thank you, Justin and all of our staff, for bringing this forward and starting this conversation. It's very much appreciated.
Let's not leave it at this.
Yeah, let's not leave it at this. All right, we will be moving on to, we'll be moving on to a conversation on the governance and ends policies discussion. And I'll wait for just a moment for it to settle down. But I'm just going to perhaps shock council a little bit, because this conversation might go differently than what you might have anticipated. I've had a long conversation with interim city manager Bob Zine. Councilman Danforth was in on it with us. Previous conversations with several councilmen in the past, and I'm going to suggest scrapping the whole thing. Just deleting it. And I will go to interim city manager Bob Zine to explain some more of it.
Okay, Thank you, Mayor. Yes, in front of the council, it came up in conversation. We approved the governance and ends policy in November 2023. There was staff conversations about this. The department head team met. We did try to revamp it into more of a policy reading document. Within that document, it does talk about some of the city manager and staff interactions, as well as the city manager and council. Gives the council's vision, which I don't know if that was thoroughly vetted through kind of the process that the council wanted to use. Staff is good with doing whatever the council kind of wants, but I think this is a document that has a little bit of confusion with it. We do have a home rule charter that kind of allows for the description of the form of government. We do follow state laws. We have an employee handbook that we follow. So I guess part of the conversation that we had a little bit earlier today was, is it a policy that people are really looking at, or is it a policy that people aren't really aware of? So I think that's just to kind of open that conversation with council and get some of the direction from this group.
Thank you. And I'll go to Councilman Danforth, but some of the questions that we were asking were, what's necessary in this document and what's enforceable? Because there's really nothing enforceable in here, and it's more just general ideas that you can't force anyone to follow, and it actually could pose more confusion than not having it. But I appreciate the work that was done on it. It's better than what it was. So I want to thank Maria for doing that. I know you did a lot of the work on editing it. There can be some things in here that could be good to have for the city moving forward, but I'm just not sure if keeping it in a governance and ends policies is the best way of doing it. If it's truly something that's important, let's put it in ordinance and actually make it enforceable, is my idea. Councilman Danforth, would you like to add some more?
Yeah, I look at the mere title, governance and ends policy. Governance is our home rule charter. And as it's been stated, is that we also have state law. And so we have documents and laws and requirements that are required of us. This is a redundant document, in my opinion. I've went through this thing, and number one, there's a number of things that are either lightly touched on or touched on completely, or maybe should be included in our home rule charter. There's a lot of things in here that they're so vague and fluffy that they mean nothing. They really don't. It's hard to have them even be meaningful to anybody. But then there's some items, at least if we look at some of the reasons why they're in there, some of them should go into some form of what we already have for an operating policies, whether that's human resources or whether that's budgeting or purchasing or whatever it is. We've already got a mechanism for that is, to me, is clearer. And I think what we need to do is not scrap this, but what we need to do is take it and decide what should go into the home rule charter that may or may not be there, what should go into policies. Then it just goes away, because I don't think there's anything that allows it to stand on its own. I really don't. So that's where I'm at, and I said the challenge to me isn't to go through this today and say how do we want it to read. The challenge is to say what should go where, if it's not already included in the home rule charter or policy, because that's the ones that are going to get used. By the redundancy of this thing, then we offer ourselves the opportunity for contradiction, for interpretation issues from state law or from the home rule charter or from policy. It's just too much. Scrap it, Mayor, get it back to where it should be, into two working documents that are usable for council, staff, and the public.
And you said it better than I did when I mentioned scrap it. what I meant is in the form that it is now, in this entity. What is valuable to keep, we need to put it in a place where it's clear as to what we're going to be doing with it and have some meat on the bone behind it. Councilman Peters, you had something?
Yeah, I was gonna maybe just share some thoughts. Along the same lines, I guess what I just heard for the last hour and a half is that developers want us to spend time in figuring out things that can help the community. I think that certainly this has some helpfulness to it, I suppose, but I guess if we're gonna have staff spend time on items that are policy or whatever driven, I'd rather spend some time on figuring out how to make development better, how to be more efficient, how to govern better. And I guess I would just move to scrap this, if that's the term we're gonna use, or dissolve it. Is that more politically correct? Dissolve it?
Councilman Beeler.
Thank you, Mayor. What prompted this whole process? Council retreat. Yeah, he said council retreat.
And that was what it was that retreat at the Goss.
Yeah.
I mean, 2 years ago.
How many years without this? And I think we did okay. But a lot of work went into this, and I do believe that I think she was looking at another community, and perhaps one of the people we had that were speakers at that the retreat that we had maybe had some influence on putting this thing together. But I remember when I first saw this in development, I thought, well, why in the hell are we doing that?
Councilman Peters?
One more thing I thought I would just make mention of is that I look at this kind of like an ordinance. If we're not going to enforce the ordinance, we would never have it as an ordinance. And so I don't know how we would ever enforce something like this. And then who is going to be the one that polices it? Who is going to be the enforcer to us? So that's 100% rhetorical, but my point here is that if we're not going to take action on it, there's no use of using it. But I will say, with the council retreat, I thought it was good to discover this. I just don't think that it's probably necessary that we implement it.
Councilman Tupper?
I spent quite a bit of time this weekend reading over this. Matter of fact, I had to go back a couple pages and read something because there's a lot of things that really contradict each other. So after spending that much time reading it, I think I came out of it with a little bit more confusion. And I'm not dead set against scrapping it or whatever you want to call it, but I want to thank everybody that went through it. But I think a lot of this could be done by ordinance. So,
and I want to thank staff, because it was staff that recognized that this was problematic, and they were just trying to come up with a way to improve it. In bringing forward this better version, what I think I saw was that perhaps there's an even better way of doing it. But it really was staff that took it upon themselves to realize that this caused confusion. And I can see some of the parts, because there's language in there like city manager shall do their best and to enforce all the rules, except when it's not necessarily what they want to do. I mean, there's like some language in there, like even about non-compliance. Why do we have a rule on not following our own rules? Is an example of what was brought forward. And I think that was, I want to thank the staff for bringing it forward and bringing it to our attention again. But even in the time that we've adopted these in the 2 years, I can't say where this has improved things. Interim City Manager Bob Zine.
Thank you, Mayor. I think the one thing that staff, a number of us have worked in municipal government for quite a while, and we do recognize that the home rule charters are one document that we really follow the most, as it is our little bit difference of some of the state statutes. But yeah, when we pretty much know where to look for anything that kind of guides us in terms of budgetary anything like that. So this document too, there was kind of some contradiction and a little bit confusion on our part. So I think, I don't know, most of the department heads, some of them are here, and like I said, it was a good meeting to have because we had some of those conversations as well. So we did want to put it forward in a manner that made it read like a policy, but there was definitely still some confusion. So,
Councilman Bueller?
Thanks, Mayor. I'm going to ask the question because I have an idea how this came to be. Did we sort of plagiarize some other communities' policy? I mean, I think what happened, look, she's laughing back there, because it's true. Yeah, because I think what happened was Amanda ran into this with one of the folks at our retreat and thought, by golly, we need to have one of those too. So we'll just take yours and maybe add a few words that we think should be different, and that was the end of it. So there.
And Councilman Peters just asked me off the side if we need a motion to do away with it. I would say not at a work session, but bring it forward. Yes. Councilman Tupper?
If you read through that policy well enough, it does state in there that we could vote during a council or a work session, so.
And I do want to make it clear, according to Robert's rules, you can vote in executive session. It's just by South Dakota State open meetings laws, we can't. But Councilman Danforth?
Before we dissolve this thing, whatever the term we're going to use, I'd like to make a suggestion, because the key is how do we proceed, right? To simply say, let's have a vote to get rid of it. I think what we need to do, what we should do, is we should have a body of people, 3, 4 people, whatever that is, go through this and make recommendations on where stuff goes. Is it needed? Is it already covered somewhere else? If not, where should it go? And most likely, it's either going to go into the home rule charter, or it's going to go into current policy or modified policy. That way, the council can say, okay, what do we have? And we can go through here, and it can be expressed as to, all right, this is out, or this is covered in the home rule charter, or we should add some language at some point in the home rule charter to cover this. And so we all know when we're sitting here knowing what to do with this, we know what the suggestion is. Mayor, that's my suggestion of how we proceed. I would say it's up to you and the interim city manager to figure out who those 2, 3, 4 people are, to do that, bring it back to council for consideration, and that's what I would do.
And I'm okay with that, but I would also challenge council, if you've read through it, if you did find a section that you thought had value, let us know. It would make it a lot faster from our perspective. Yes, if there is something in there when you did read it that you thought, okay, this is very important, I would like to keep this, maybe change the language a little bit, but I would encourage council to forward that idea to us. It would just make things a lot faster, but yes, thank you. Any further comments on this? All right. Are there any future council items read ahead? Yep, Councilman Danforth?
Mayor, having read this governance and ends policy, that I really think, folks, we need to get back to have a discussion about our capital projects priorities. That's important. We've done some legwork on that. We need to have discussions about specifically and why each one of us feel the way we do on that list. That's, to me, that is a very important aspect of what our job is, and I think it would help staff immensely in understanding their direction.
And I'm going to add to that in a comment I think Councilman Peters was saying, I think you asked, is this really what we want our staff to be focusing on, or do they have more important things to focus on? I'd say I had a 3+ hour conversation with Councilman Danforth and an interim city manager, Bob Zine, today, and I would say, is this what we want to focus on? we have important things that we could be doing as a council, And I think we need to get back to that. I think we lost sight of that. Wasn't, I'll look in the mirror and say I could do better, and I think that we have an opportunity now with, in this time of finding a new city manager, and we could rededicate ourselves to what makes Watertown the best that it can be. Any further comments? Councilman Tupper.
Those 3 hours could have been used working with developers, so it seems to be a bigger problem, so.
You don't want me to drywall. All right. Any further comments? Any public comment? Yeah, well, I have to ask. There's no reason to go into executive session. Chair will entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion made by Councilman Tupper, seconded by Councilman Bueller. All those in favor of adjournment, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries.